As your host, I will ensure that I get as many answered as possible. The capacity to learn is a gift. Ability to learn is a skill, and the willingness to learn is a choice. With the ever-growing emphasis on building learning culture at workplace and in lives, the only choice that is really left is to decide what and how one wants to learn. As we rise and march into the new normal, wellness is a new metric that organizations are tracking closely. Individuals are exploring newer, personalized, and continuously enriching experience in everything that they do. Why should then wellness be restricted only to mental and physical? In fact, learning is a fitting addition to the wellness strategy for organizations as these employees explore and seek experiences, opportunities for upskilling, reskilling, thereby growth. It gives me immense pleasure to welcome our esteemed panelists as we explore and discuss the wellness quotient of organizations on learning. I have with me today Mr. Nishchay Suri, President, Asia Pacific, Middle East and Africa, EdCast. Joining him for the discussion are Dr. Amit Singh, Associate Vice President and Head Corporate HR, Aster DM Healthcare. We also have with us Dr. Advaita Govind Menon, Senior HR Specialist, DEVA. A very warm welcome to all of you, gentlemen, to this session. And it's such a pleasure to have you all with us.
Thank you, Nitya. Thank you. It's a real pleasure being on this webcast today. And big thank you to my two friends, the two doctors who are going to pepper this conversation for us today, Dr. Amit and Dr. Menon.
Thank you, Nishchay. Very happy to be here. Thank you to SHRM and EdCast for actually holding this lovely interaction.
Thank you. Thank you, Nishchay. Thank you, Nitya. And I must confess that Nishchay is somebody that I've grown up listening to. So it's absolute honor to be on panel with you, Nishchay. I must confess before we start.
You're not taking off any performance pressure of the panel discussion by saying so. Okay, so should we do a deep dive on what we found in this very interesting study that we do globally called the Learning Health Index Study? And we've done this edition specifically for the Middle East in partnership with Protivity. And the inspiration was really about building a deep understanding of the learning proficiencies that are needed in an organization. And clearly, the Band-Aid approach, the piecemeal approach of dealing with learning in the past hasn't done justice to what could have been achieved if we leverage the power of learning within an organization. And therefore, this concept of putting an ecosystem together, it's really about these proficiencies that interact with one another, that create value, and that value is in the form of either shift in behavior or shift in performance within an organization. So I'm going to share some insights. These are hot off the press that have come through from the Middle East report. Of course, we've done this in India already. We've done it in Africa, in the Middle East, in the US and in Europe. So we have a lot of global data and some common trends, some unique and emerging trends, which are perhaps contextual and more cultural, but nonetheless nuggets of gems that we can all use. So moving on, let me, if you can move to the next slide, please, Amit. The inspiration behind the study was really this book by Peter Senge in the 90s called The Fifth Discipline. And Peter Senge actually called out, again, mentioning that the disciplines that are required for an organization to overcome the disabilities that exist within an organization. He called a learning organization is where people continually expand their capacity to create the results they truly desire, when new and expansive patterns of thinking are nurtured, where collective aspiration is set free, and where people are continually learning how to learn together. So a lot is packed into that definition. But this is where he highlighted the importance of being a learning organization and the benefits associated with being a learning organization. Later in the year 2008, Harvard released this very interesting article called "Is Yours a Learning Organization?" and called out the core capabilities that are needed to be a learning organization, dividing it into three parts really: a conducive environment, processes, and a supportive leadership. So they simplified it and said that's what you really need to put in place to have a learning organization which outperforms competitors, where people feel that they grow faster, they are more engaged, they're more committed, the customers are happier, you innovate at a faster pace. I mean, there are numerous benefits. So I think the jury's out in terms of learning organization is one which is aspirational, and there are no skeptics around challenging the very notion of being a learning organization. The question is now, how do we get there? So moving to the next slide, I'm going to share with you a few conceptual definitions which I think are important here. To begin with, learning health is an organization's collective abilities to perform. So at the heart of an organization is performance. And learning health is that collective ability to perform at higher and higher levels. The learning health framework is a comprehensive model of 8 distinct dimensions, which I'll share with you, of learning to contribute to an organization's learning health. So learning strategy, business planning, impact and measurement, L&D policies and processes, the L&D portfolio itself, learner experience, learning culture, tools and tech, and L&D competence. So those are the 8 dimensions. The index, so the learning health index is an aggregate of scores on each of these 8 dimensions of learning health across a 5-point scale. So it's very simple. Across these 8 dimensions, you come up with an aggregate score. And when we do analysis with a lot of data, we try and also then represent it in clusters. So we developed 5 stages of learning health to give directional input to how organizations can progress. And these ranges are, if you scored between 20 and 39, you'd be in ailing. If you scored between 40 and 59, it'd be coping. In developing, it would be a range of 60 to 79. In nourishing, 80 to 99. And if you are a thriving organization, you would be 100, which is a bit of a idealistic state. I would expect no organization to ever be at 100, because remember, it's an ecosystem which is dynamic, and the environment is changing around you, your internal circumstances are changing. So for everything to be in complete harmony at all points in time seems to be an idealistic position to try and be in. Let's look at the next slide, please. And these are really looking at, the 8 dimensions that I spoke of. Here they are for you, which we've already been through. So if we can go to the next slide. And somehow I seem to have lost the visual. Nitya, can you reshare, please?
Sure.
So we did this study across the Middle East with 51 companies, and participation from various countries in the Middle East, right, from Saudi to Dubai and a largest contribution is from UAE. So Saudi, UAE, Bahrain, Oman, Qatar, Kuwait. And you see the sectors that participated. So multinationals, private, semi-government, family-owned, and government, and the industries that participated in the study. So that's just a sense of broad participation, good representation. Let's go to the next one, please. Yes, I can see the screen. Thank you now. So here is a distribution of where companies, a majority of the companies lie. Now, the average learning health index, okay, so which means 51 companies participated. What is the average score? Well, there is good news and there is bad news. The bad news is that 56 obviously is basically showing you that most organizations are simply coping. The good news is, well, you have an opportunity of really raising the bar and creating that conducive environment, creating that ecosystem that can lead to business benefits. If you see on dimensions, and there's some emerging patterns here. So, the weakest links that we have seen when we have done this study across the world, tools and tech is the weakest link in every country that we have done this survey and this research in. And learning strategy and business planning is the strongest dimension in terms of the score, relative. So when I'm looking at tools and tech being the weakest and learning and strategy being the strongest, that doesn't necessarily mean in an absolute sense it is where it ought to be from learning strategy and business planning standpoint. And if this score of tools and tech was 84, but the score of learning strategy and business planning was 96, and 84 was the lowest score, it would still be relatively the weakest link. But here, not only is it the weakest link, but we also find that the score itself signals worry, that a lot of work has to be done in the area of tools and tech. The other area that we found, again, to be one of the weaker links is impact and measurement and learning culture. And there is not much here to really distinguish. As you see, a lot of the scores are in the 50s, and 2 scores are in the 60s and 1 is in the 40s. But clearly, all of them show that there is a lot of improvement that can be made across these dimensions. Let's go to the next slide, please. Here is the distribution or the scoring across industries. Maybe I'll invite Dr. Amit and Dr. Advait to perhaps share some perspective. But we found that, again, the conglomerates have scored the highest, followed by the retail sector. The banking and financial services is somewhere in the middle. And healthcare is also, I guess, a second runner-up. Hospitality and manufacturing are the least. Manufacturing, understandably so. I think it's not to say that manufacturing companies, there is no digital learning or the ecosystem of learning, it doesn't necessarily exist, but they have been slow to embrace and technology per se to scale learning and make it available for blue-collar workers. Any insight from you, Dr. Advait or Dr. Amit, on this slide particularly?
Nishchay, prima facie, when I look at it, I believe there could be, I don't know, I haven't yet to go through the full report. I believe there could be a correlation between the amount of time that is available for the employees to be trained or to learn within their own organization versus this score, and the organization's own importance of learning per se. For example, conglomerate and retail, there is always some kind of innovation happening, or there is cross-pollination happening in the conglomerates. Maybe that's why the learning scores are higher. Whereas the learning cycles could be slower in manufacturing and hospitality because they may not have been, the processes may not have been touched by innovation as much as they have been touched in some of the other industries. I mean, that's just a thought.
Sure, and we will pick on that because there's a lot more we need to discuss on the panel. Let's go to the next slide, please. So here are some key highlights. As I said, this is really, fresh off the block, where you see the overall score is at 56, which means coping, moving to developing in that stage. 22% of the organizations are ailing, 33% are coping, 33% of the organizations are developing, and only 12% of the entire sample surveyed are in nourishing, which is a healthy, I would say when you're in the nourishing stage of health, it signifies that yes, learning is playing a meaningful strategic role in ensuring that business performs at higher and higher levels. As I said, the the linkage between learning and business strategy. And that's one of the strongest links we found in every country that we've surveyed. To me, it doesn't come as a surprise because that's really the starting point. And, intention, strategic orientation all comes from business need and business purpose, and where learning must interact, be involved, understand, address business needs. We found a score of 64, and that really means that learning and business strategy is involved in identifying the current and future skilling needs on a case-to-case basis. That's why it's not such a strong score. It's not mission critical. It's not part of the DNA. It's on a case-to-case basis. You see the score on learning tech, and to me, this is again not surprising. It's been one of the weakest links, but steadily improving across markets. So when we do the next edition of the study, which we're going to launch shortly, which is Learning Health Index 3.0, I do expect that we will see a big shift on this specific dimension across countries. Given what we have seen with digitalization, with automation, with working from home, clearly this is one area which must be embraced and provides the biggest opportunity for value addition within organizations in the space of learning and development. Let's go to the next slide, please. Now, when you look at impact and measurement, as I said here again, there's been rudimentary metrics being used, not higher order metrics, not those that are closely linked with business. We've been really measuring ours and unique learner coverage, and which are all level 0, level 1 matrices. Clearly, there are organizations that have embraced analytics with a vengeance, which means they have started creating data lakes, mining data, using that data, understanding learner behavior, trying to marry that with business metrics and performance. But by and large, this is again a weak area, as I mentioned, and the score here again for the Middle East study is at 56, which clearly means that a lot of work has to be done in this area as well. From a learner experience standpoint, this is again growing leaps and bounds in organizations, and where the user or the learner is at the driving seat and at the front and center of everything that an organization does. So whether it is making learning available anytime, anywhere, or personalizing learning, or using AI to recommend learning, or creating virtual bots and learning assistants, there is a whole host of things that are happening in personalization, gamification, making it interesting, making it engaging. Last but not the least, and to me, I'm most excited about this last point, which is learning in the flow of work. And while this was being talked about, I think Josh Bersin spoke of it a couple of years ago, but there was very little action on the ground. And now you see that this has emerged to be one of the top priorities for organizations, where learning is made available in different systems of productivity and applications. So if you're a user of Teams or Zoom or WebEx or Office 365 or ServiceNow or Salesforce, all these applications where business is being done, and you want learning and working to seamlessly integrate. Now the widget philosophy, of where you can embed learning and make it available while you are working in that system itself, rather than have to go and learn somewhere else and work somewhere else. So it's bridging that gap and bringing learning and working closely together, which is now a reality. And finally, I'm going to show you some tech trends that are emerging. If you can move to the next slide, On mobile learning, so you see already under implementation, no surprises, anytime, anywhere learning. The journey only begins from there, just given the world order that we work in currently. Use of AI, much more that can be done with the use of AI in learning and development. Use of gamification, social learning, which is peer-to-peer learning, personalization, as I mentioned, and then learning in the flow of work. You see the big focus and emphasis there, already under implementation. So I see a distinct possibility that if we use each of these aspects and develop plans of creating a healthier ecosystem, you see that the use of gamification has a part to play, the use of social learning has a part to play, AI has a part to play, mobile learning has a part to play, personalization has a part to play, learning in the flow of work has a part to play. And here you see what's already under implementation, what's planned for implementation in the next year or in the next 2 years, and people who aren't even considering it yet. Okay, so that kind of brings a wrap to this discussion on the report itself. There is obviously a whole report which you can download. There's a wealth of wisdom. I would all recommend people on the webinar today must make the effort and download the report. You can even download the India and the Africa report, and if you wanted to draw notes in comparison between the two or between the three, it makes a very interesting read. So back to you, Nitya.
Thank you so much, Nishay. And there was so many interesting finds there. And as Nishay mentioned, as a special gesture, EdCast is, allowing you to download this report, the first ever Learning Health Index report for the Middle East. And we will be sharing the link here on chat. So please feel free to go ahead and download. All right, moving on. So Nishay, it's very clear that learning, upskilling definitely is not going to be looked at the same light as ever before. There are newer experiences that people are seeking to learn. There are newer methodologies available that that are catering to these needs in a more effective, interesting manner. What we are very keen to understand is as we move ahead on this path, what are some of the skills that we will be exploring for the future? What are some of the challenges? And Amit, Advaita, you're all at the helm of your organizations where you are seeing this play out day in and day out. So what are some of the critical challenges that you're facing, and how can we go about doing this? So Nishay, I'll invite you for this moderation of this particular panel with Dr. Amit and Dr. Advaita. Over to you, gentlemen. We are very keen to hear from you on what it takes to be right up there as we go ahead on this path of learning.
Thank you so much, Nitya, and welcome once again to Dr. Amit and Dr. Advaita. So let's kickstart this power-packed session. See, now over the last 2 years, the forces of change have been impacting 3 major dimensions of work: the work itself, where the work is done, and who does the work. And we spoke about the acceleration of digitalization and automation. In addition to that, the change in workforce demographics, the types of employability, they're all generating a colossal demand for jobs, which is generating a plethora of opportunities for talent development across industries. In the Middle East, in fact, and this is a very interesting statistic that I came across, 59% of CEOs compared to 49% globally aim to increase their investments in digital transformation by 10% or more over the next 3 years as a direct response to the impact of COVID-19. And additionally, 71% of workers in GCC believe that technology provides more opportunities than risks. Now, in light of these unprecedented changes, organizations have shifted their focus back to the fundamental concept of skills as a means to success. The World Economic Forum in fact, in 2020, declared an emergency when it came to reskilling, stating that jobs that are being transformed by the technologies of the Industrial Revolution 4.0, due to that, we would need to reskill more than 1 billion people by 2030. And 68% of the HR leaders have selected building critical skills and competencies as the number one initiative on their priority list to support organizational priorities. What is important is, in this race to reskill, we need agility. Agility is going to be a key transformation lever. And countries and organizations alike must invest the time, the effort, the money to reskill their workforce so that they can quickly adapt and adjust to this new order of work. PwC's recent Hopes and Fears survey of the Middle East states that 86% of the respondents are confident that they can learn further skills to improve their employability, with 82% agreeing that it is their responsibility to update their skills rather than relying on their employer. So if organizations don't get it done, anyway, individuals will find a way to get it done for themselves. That is a very, very positive and encouraging sign as we move or try to move the paradigm from push to pull, right? We always refer to this as we've been pushing learning, and what we need to create is an environment of pull-based learning. So with this introduction, what I'd like to do is organize our panel in 3 acts. Act 1, through the looking glass, the skills of tomorrow. So that's going to be our Act 1. Act 2 is going to be disruption, drives reinvention, challenges in the skilling revolution. And Act 3, which is bridging the skill gap, and what impact does that create? So let's start with Act 1, and through the looking glass, the skills of tomorrow, and put the spotlight on that. Now, jobs are transforming, and so are the skills that are needed to do the job. And organizations are now shifting their focus on building composite capabilities that require employees to possess a combination of technical skills, professional skills, domain knowledge. Question for you, Dr. Amit. What are the new skills or composite skills that will drive business outcomes in the new world of work?
So thank you, Nishchay. I mean, I could just go on for the remaining 30 minutes just listening to you. Yeah, that's your power. So, great question. Right. If I were to look at skills, I think it'd be unfair. So let's go one step behind. Right? There is a changing consumer need and expectation from each of us in our industry. Let me contextualize this more in the industry that I'm in for over the last 6 years, is healthcare. Now, when you look at healthcare as an industry, right, what do you want? You're a consumer, and all of us have been consumers of healthcare. What do we want? Right? We want to feel empowered, because that's the most important. I want to feel empowered that I have care in my hands. Second, I want to be driven by evidence, not by hearsay. That's fact. Third, I want to make it time saving, because healthcare is scary. Even a dentist appointment or meeting somebody, a doctor, going through a surgery is scary. It's time taking. It's a lot of mental preparation. The fourth is really, can I trust them? Do I really trust? And this is a trust deficit, right? Globally across, right? And there is enough research to say I trust my cell phone provider more than I trust my healthcare provider. What an irony. Right? And fifth, if I say, I want to have a positive experience because I'm scared and worried. Now, when you looked at it vis-a-vis 10 years ago, I just needed healthcare. Provision of healthcare was luxury. Today, healthcare is a given. My context is changing. And that's why I always bring the point is that skills will be ever changing in this chair. What is important is how do we constantly focus on capabilities? And the biggest capability, I say, in the age is learning to learn, being a lifelong learner. Because technology will change, skills will change, that particular era will change. How do I? Because that gives me 2 important aspects in terms of capability. Is one, I'm confident, but I'm humble because I know I don't know, yet I know enough. Right? I think that's the central capability. If you look at it in the entire consumer experience, the second was, how do I create trust and how do I create the experience is about empathy and communication. Now, these are capabilities.
So you're drawing a distinction between, and just for the audience so that they get a better handle on the distinction you're making between skills and capabilities.
Absolutely.
You're calling empathy a capability, not a skill.
Absolutely. Right. Now, when I demonstrate empathy or when I deeply feel empathy for my consumer and when I love my consumer, right? One, I don't want to sell him something. I want to empower him. And that's where the second dimension of skill comes is, can I provide more digital platforms for him to make that? Can I go back and make more data-based decision-making to say, 100 people like you, Nishchay, went through a surgery, 99 evolved. This is what they did, right? I don't have that science. I don't have the database evidence. So for us, I think the capabilities will be overarching in the healthcare industry, and that will continue. Like I said, is empathy, communication, and how do you build trust? And the skills like we see today, these are tools. I consider skills as tools of delivery, right? It will be more of digital, more of AI, because you'll be dependent much more in terms of even for your healthcare delivery. And I think the second, very, very importantly, will be how do I get data around what I'm going to talk? So I have my capabilities, but as this evolves, right, my skill will evolve, but that's how I see the next 5 years going to be disrupted.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. I mean, one big takeaway for me was you have good telecom service in given that you have greater trust. I wish we enjoyed the same in India here. Interesting.
Yeah, or maybe if I flip the example, Nishchay, I trust my cell phone more than I trust my healthcare provider. Right? I trust Apple more. And that's an irony. That's an irony, right? Whereas it should have been the reverse.
So you know what? This is a study that Oxford did. It's called the Oxford Economics Global Talent 2021. And skills in high demand over the next 5 to 10 years. So digital skills, we spoke about that. Agile thinking skills, the ability to consider and prepare for multiple scenarios, innovation, ambiguity, interpersonal and communication skills. I think a lot of your focus in your answer lay there. Co-creativity, relationship building with customers, teaming, collaboration, empathy, so on and so forth. And interestingly, when I looked at Coursera's Global Skills Report for 2021, now this is specific to MENA, trending business skills in MENA, strategy and operations, digital marketing, project management, theoretical computer science, C programming, programming principles, design and product, Adobe Photoshop, computational thinking, graphic design, web development. So it's interesting, the reason I call out composite is I see pretty much everywhere around the world, the focus on two sides of the house, be it in terms of EI, EQ or IQ. And I like to look at it as that package of digital, tech, professional, all coming together. Okay, let's move to our next question. Now, L&D professionals globally are using various tactics to upskill and reskill their workforce. 41% are using internal data and tools to identify skill gaps in the organization, and 36% working very closely with their executives or the organization leadership to align skilling programs to a revised business strategy in response to COVID. Advait, Deva, how are you identifying the most important skills to train for?
Nishchay, essentially, there are 3 different ways one can actually identify skills which can be used to train people for future. The first one is you do a traditional skill gap analysis or the training need analysis. So there are several tools available for it. People are actually adept at it. The second one, which is very important, is the cascade that happens from the strategy. So every 4 years or every 3 years when the strategy gets refreshed, there's a technology change or there's a disruption in any one of our functions that requires reskilling. We identify that well in advance, 4 or 5 years in advance. The third bit is actually assessment of individuals. So you assess individuals on a particular skill set that you believe is required for the work. And then you look at the skill gap and then you train them or you skill them through different means that are available. But if I were to flip my hat and wear the hat of a researcher and ask myself the question, if I were to advise any youngster, what skill should he reskill himself with so that he gets a better paying job, or he's more valuable to his or her organization, I'd go back to the resource-based view of the firm, which talks about the philosophy of VRIN. A resource or a skill should be valuable, rare, inimitable, and non-tradable. You may not be able to find all of these four, but even if you were to tick two out of these four boxes, I think you have actually picked up the right set of skill set. I use that lens in identifying these skills. When I think we'll be speaking more about it, about the skill directory that we created. But if you look at it, VRIN, so valuable, repeating again, valuable, rare, inimitable, and non-tradable. Let me give you an example. You know, I work for Dubai Water and Electricity Authority, and we are a large conglomerate. We have got vertical integration, horizontal integration in our organization as well. So let's look at our gas turbines. So the gas turbines, you know, the normal understanding would be that anybody with a mechanical or an electrical engineering background can actually come and operate a gas turbine. Could be an operator, right? Whether you have a diploma or a degree in engineering. But given the technological advancements, the softwares that is required and all of those, there are very specific engines which are very efficient. So the Honeywell and GE engines, for example, the latest engines are actually 30-40% more efficient than the other engines that are available. Now, you don't get that skill in a engineering college. You don't get that skill in a training program. So what do we do to skill them? We have actually created a VR room, where a 3D VR room where people actually can come in and they understand the engine per se before they even get into operating it or repairing it or maintaining it. So skilling can happen in organization in different ways. Or say, for example, if I were to use the VRIN example, something that we all can relate to is coding or software engineering. You know, when we were kids, Java, C, C++ used to be the language that, you know, that we used to study and that we used to learn. Few years down the line, a decade down the line, it used to be C, C++, and then Python. Python came into being. Now, if you look at the languages that people are talking about, they are called Solidity and Haskell, you know, the languages for the cryptocurrencies, for the blockchains. A simple Google search will actually tell you that the salary for somebody who has studied Solidity and Haskell is 10 times higher than somebody who codes in Python or Java or C, C++. Now, for a youngster who is looking forward to code, he has to just figure out, is this language going to be valuable? Is it rare, which means there are very few people who have that skill? Is it inimitable? Not many. If it is difficult, not many people can actually look at it. And is it context specific? Is it organization specific, which is very important for the organization? You may not be able to transfer it from one organization to another organization. Now, the last point around this is the challenge in organizations is not the identification of skill, because there are different ways to identify this skill. It is not even skilling, because there are different ways to skill it, and organizations like EdCast are actually enabling the same. The challenge is bridging or tracking the skill gap. So if the skill gap has been bridged, was it because of skilling or for some other reason? Has it happened at the right pace at the right time? Are you able to establish that relationship? That's the question that leaders are actually struggling with. With that, I would conclude my answer, Nishchay.
Yeah, thank you very much. Very, very helpful, very insightful. I mean, one point I don't necessarily agree with completely, maybe around, is it as simple to identify the skills to begin with? Just given the rapid change, right, that is happening, how efficiently, quickly can an organization, and perhaps it's easier in your environment, but with this ever-changing business need, demand, disruption occurring within an organization, organizations themselves don't know which skills are important.
Yes.
So the starting point itself is not something which is definitive. It's ever-changing, and that creates downstream implications. But I think in manufacturing, in utilities, in energy, it may be far more stable than, for example, what we witnessed in the tech industry itself or financial services, which went through a big change. Okay, let's move to our our second act, which is disruption drives reinvention, challenge in skilling revolution. Now, in 2021, according to LinkedIn Learning, 33% of L&D professionals globally expect their budgets to increase, with 19% expecting a decrease. Yet learning is seen an important cost center, but not as a strategic capability worth reallocating millions of dollars to. So 33% of L&D professionals globally expect their budgets to increase, with 19% expecting a decrease. So there is still a fair amount of optimism that actually your budgets are going to increase. But that to me is still not good enough. I mean, it signals incremental thinking. So, Dr. Amit, do you think that skilling is a top priority for organizations, and that no board and CEO will ever argue that that is the case? They won't put an argument against it. But the real question is, how do you make a compelling business case to increase investment significantly? I mean, millions of dollars in learning and development.
Sure. Great question, Nishchay. How do you make a business case? I think the first part, when you look at this, is, what is the problem that we're trying to solve? And if you're a part of the business problem that business is trying to solve, there is a case. It's when you look at the service industry, right? Like earlier, it was largely an era where it was manufacturing, right? And now with services and technology, the key differentiator is not just the technology, but the person who uses the technology. So if there is a unique or distinct business case that you're trying to solve, you will of course get the investment. But learning for the sake of learning and being good does not happen, whereas it's the contrary. Now, I have a very unique theory around this. When you look at really learning, right, what do organizations want, and how are you really happy, is the first, right, is about yourself, is how do you work around good human beings? Right? That's what really gives you happiness in life, is I'm working around good people. I'm working around people who are sane. I'm working around people who really value me, right? And this is goodness. That's the part. The second is around people. I'm working with people that influence people better, and I'm better engaged. And that can be sort of quantified. The first one is very rarely can be quantified. How do I differentiate an empathetic manager from a non-empathetic manager? I can't. And business doesn't respect it. But interestingly, that's the word that makes us really happy. The second is around people, the empowerment, the engagement, etc. And the third is really business results. Interestingly, business results is the easiest to quantify. People empowerment the second most, and third is being a good human being. Whereas in life, that's the most important one that one should be reaching, right? So if you can quantify it backwards to say, here's the business case, here's the business context, and I'm going to solve your problem. Again, going back to what you and Advaita discussed, and I paused there because I wanted to bring this as a part of my conversation. And I think it was very interesting where you saw some of the industries which had very high score, and one of which was healthcare and retail. Yeah, the reason
high relative score.
Yes, and retail. So we work in the retail. We've got about 200 pharmacy stores and largely around healthcare, where we have about 30 hospitals and about 125 medical centers with 22,000 people. So majority of it is in healthcare and retail, and these two industries. The reason you saw a higher investment or propensity for learning was because you could quantify results, right? To business, you could quantify learning to results and business outcomes, right? In a manufacturing, it's about quality. I don't know whether my customer will buy. Here, if I give him a better experience, I see a far easier linkage between input of learning and outcome of results, right? And hence you see this disjuncture. So if one were to look at it, in a more holistic manner, the biggest problem I have with L&D is that they sit in an isolated bucket trying to ask for funds, whereas that should be the mainstream within the people function to say, I have performance. We're going to use performance as the central yardstick. At one end, I'm going to use skilling. Other end, I'm going to reward people. And that's how I'm going to look at, the outcomes in terms of how do I balance between reward and skilling. Second, how much do I build? How much do I buy? Is you're going to acquire skills from outside. That's an easier way. But is that sustainable and there's a cost to it? Can you attribute the cost to buy versus build and a differentiator? So I think those would be two very, very important, imperatives. Third and last, Middle East has always been a lag indicator. And we spoke about this earlier, is typically when you looked at the Middle East, people said you go to the Gulf, make some money and come back. Right? Now that's become a big problem because people after 10 years realized that they were so non-skilled or de-skilled that they wouldn't be able to find jobs back even in the countries. And now it's become a country-specific agenda to say, how do we make a UAE a talent retention agenda or a talent retention market? And that's why it's very important for business heads, and you would have seen the higher score, is more imperative. And the crisis is even more because you've not had the period of scaling over the last 20, 30 years.
Great, super points. Interestingly, as you brought up tying skilling to performance, we've been working on this model. So it's for skilling. It journey really starts with having the right skills and at the right level of proficiency. You use those skills to execute. So clearly, without those skills, you cannot execute. Once you execute and you execute it in the right fashion, it leads to higher performance. And higher performance leads to higher rewards, monetary, non-monetary. So clearly, it's that tight alignment, not loose alignment. It's the tight alignment. And I've been a comp professional for many years. So we used to have competency-based compensation models, but very, very loose alignment. There were 6 degrees of alignment in the way that model worked. And the majority of organizations were basically at the far end, which means very loose alignment. What we are seeing now is that more and more reward professionals are equally keen to ensure that there is a tight alignment between skill acquisition, performance, and compensation. And you can actually now look at the value of a skill in its application and justify that whether a monetary reward or any other type of reward should be associated. So good, thank you. Let's move to the next question, and this brings me to this entire concept of a skill taxonomy. And every company has 5 sources of information when it comes to a skill taxonomy. Your company's own learning tools, your learning experience platform, your learning management system, your learning record store, which captures all data into your employees' learning activities. You have recruiting tools. You have third-party libraries, example, Burning Glass. You work with content providers, Udemy, Udacity, Skillsoft, Coursera. You have your own company's competency models, a leadership model, a sales capability model. Now, a big challenge faced by companies is not having a unified system of record for their skills. You can well imagine that you and me don't ever speak the same language. You use collaboration, I use teamwork. We don't even know how they're intended in their application. So companies are gathering and building these multiple skill databases, resulting in several skill taxonomies that do not match up. Dr. Advait, what initiatives are you taking specifically at Deva to create this one skill system of record or unified language for skills across your organization?
Nishya, you have known me for over 10 years now, and a lot of my work around skills and competencies has been under your guidance. So I think I'll take cues from my experience as a consultant in Mercer and in KPMG, and also wear my hat as a practitioner out here to respond to this question. I enjoy actually putting these frameworks in place. First of all, I'm very lucky to be in Deva, because Deva as an organization, we have done all kinds of benchmarks with all sorts of industries. We have possibly the largest learning budget for an organization of this size globally. We have done benchmark in Middle East. We have done benchmark globally for an organization in this industry of this size, or any other industry of this size. The second best organization has actually a third of our budget or half of our budget. So that's what the surveys have been telling us. So very proud of that. But when you spend money on skilling and competencies, and I would request you and the participants to bear with me because English is a funny language and terms, like you said, are actually used interchangeably. So when I speak of framework, I'll try to bring in those terms together. For us, getting the framework right was very important. So at the core of our framework was the competency directory and the skill directory. So we said, what is, in essence, competency is something that leads you to superior performance at a workplace. People could call it knowledge plus skills, and skills is something, is the ability to do something well, in plain English, right? So what we did is we established our competency framework first, both technical, which is functional, which is by different work areas, and then behavioral. We looked at the overlaps in the technical ones, and we created common competencies as well. For jobs that are actually repeatable, which are actually blue collar works, that's where we started using the term skills. Anything that is repeatable, and has got a common taxonomy, we started calling it skills. So we created a skill directory of, things that have got repeatable jobs. What did we do with those? So every employee has got a job description, or every role has got a job description. We mapped these competencies onto the role descriptions, both technical, behavioral, and skills as and where which is required. That became our Quran, Bible, or Bhagavad Gita, as you would call it, right? So all our systems started drawing out from it. So if there was an assessment to take place, we would assess people on the relevant proficiency levels or the skill levels of these competencies. Whatever the output was, that would be fed into the training plan. Now, if a training provider has to provide a training for, say, strategic thinking at level 3, he very clearly knew which skill set was to be provided. Or there is an operator training in the desalination plant, which is around chemistry, right? So we knew exactly what kind of skill sets had to be taught. It was very important to actually get the taxonomy right. The second challenge was, once you have got this taxonomy right, how do you curate the content, which is a discussion that we have had multiple times, because Coursera would have a different definition. If you Google it, there would be a different definition. If you go to Harvard or MIT's open learningware, they would have a different definition. Somebody has to actually put in the hard work to ensure that these are aligned. And it's not necessarily HR. That's where you need skilled people from the technical side to kind of help you. Once you have these entire things in place, you can assess people, you can look at gaps, and then you can report the skill progression at an individual level and at a group level. So getting the framework right becomes very important. To summarize, 3 things. Get the skill directory and competency framework in place. Second, map it to your role descriptors or job descriptions. And third, ensure that your entire talent management system is actually integrated around it. Right from hiring till the time the employee exits, they all should be speaking the same language of competencies and skills. And whenever you refresh it for the entire ecosystem.
Yeah, I think, the complexity, because there are so many variables outside of your control. You cannot control the taxonomy of recruiting tools.
Yes.
You cannot control the taxonomy of Coursera and Harvard and so on and so forth.
Right.
But at least from a standpoint of keeping a track of, there are skill taxonomy databases, right? Burning Glass, EMSI. These are all taxonomies that are being tracked and utilized, and they're being built and becoming larger and larger as they learn from different experiences, different countries. But even to your point, internally, I haven't found that the architecture is strong enough and universally applied and understood, and the assessment tools speak the same language, and in performance you speak the same language, and your recruiters speak the same language. That itself, to keep up and keep it relevant every day, something is changing every day. It's
That's
not
the big question.
That's the question.
You can set it up, but to keep it relevant on a regular basis is the big question.
Okay. So should we move to the impact of bridging the skill gap? And interestingly, before we make that transition, we have been building a unified skill architecture to normalize skills and develop capabilities at EdCast for an individual, for teams at the organizational level using our AI technology. So it defines, finds, tracks, connects skills across multiple dimensions, learning objects, within HR tech and learning ecosystems. So we are having technology do most of our work and creating the skilling synthesis with our LXP, and we have something that we launched, which is a different topic altogether for another day, which is Skills DNA, which results in a solution that enables talent and talent managers to navigate their target strategy in a myriad of preferred options for reskilling, upskilling, and learning in the flow of work. Okay, so let's get to the million-dollar question. What's the impact from bridging the skill gap? Now, PwC's 24th annual CEO survey, Middle East findings report that there is a significant gap between the global survey average and the Middle East CEOs on the question of lack of skills as a major threat. 39% of regional business leaders cite this shortfall as a specific issue for their organization, compared with 28% worldwide, demonstrating why upskilling features as a business priority for Middle East CEOs. So Dr. Amit, specifically, how concerned are you, if at all, about the shortage of skills and the impact of its availability on your organization's own growth prospects?
Yeah. I think another great question, Nishchay. I mean, there is a global skill shortage you spoke about, and Middle East has been even higher. And the reasons we discussed in the previous discussion also why. There have also been a large mindset issue. Let me bring this, or contextualize this to the industry again, to healthcare. And I think healthcare has got an even bigger problem, right? And I'm going to get slightly philosophical because it is, it is an existential problem that we have in healthcare. Now, when you look at healthcare, it's one of the industries that has the highest takeoff time. A doctor typically, to get a specialist, studies 10 years. And today, when you look at it, the young population who want to be doctors is diminishing. Now, that's going to be a future, impediment to how we look at it, right? The second most important one, so I spoke of the clinician. The second is the nursing fraternity, which is one of the highest stress jobs, is not paid as much as what we should be, because we question every pay that we do in a hospital or a healthcare center, right? I'm okay, I don't question a restaurant, but when a doctor charges me a little more, there's a lot of question, right? And we've all been through this, right? Given these two, there is a tendency. So when you look at the global health index across in the number of healthcare professionals that are going to be trained, today's generation, when you talk to them, they want instant rewards, which means what? Give me a 1-year program, 2-year program, I get to work and I start making money. I don't want to invest time in building my capabilities, and after 10 years, I finally serve the society. So for us, it's a bigger problem. The third, and it was a nightmare. So when you look at industries at high attrition, I did not know. So when I joined healthcare about 6 years ago, for me, when I saw the nursing attrition, we had about 36%. That was alarming. And I said, are you serious? Which means 1/3 of every nurse that you get in leaves by the end of the year. And the fact is, when I got down to more details, I saw the global attrition in nursing is about 35 to 40%. And we were speaking to people in NHS, where half the world wants to come and work, in across the UK, where you go the highest paid jobs. And the chief of NHS recruitment tells us that in the NHS, in central great pieces, are about 40% attrition. Now, that's the industry shift that you see. Is here's an industry that is supposed to be taking care of the rest of us in the highest form, but there's a receding entry level. And even people that are there, because of the shortage, you got 40%. So how does this industry survive? Now, we've got to go back and ask a lot of fundamental questions. Is what are we doing in schools? Now, when we were young, Nisha, if you recall, how many professionals there, and every second student or third student say, I want to be a doctor, I want to be a pilot. Today, you see, 1 in 100 will say, or even my niece who's 8 years says, I don't want to be a doctor because you got to study really hard. And that's really antagonistic to how we want to create a society. Because if you want to create a society of instant rewards, you will not have a more equitable society. So
in fact, this study that CIO did said that one of the worst hit sectors from a skill standpoint is healthcare. And in particular, because they were finding difficulties in finding skilled workers, the expansion of healthcare facilities, and the region increasingly becoming a medical tourist hub. I mean, that's why you're expanding, especially in the UAE. And the nurse to doctor to patient ratio remains high. And most managerial positions are still occupied by male candidates from Western backgrounds.
Absolutely.
The reason for this shortage in managerial jobs within the local workforce is that these positions now require IT skills as well as business and strategic leadership, which are not being met by our domestic candidates. So
Absolutely.
that's a good. Yeah, I understand that when we looked at the study, we had a relatively average score of 60 from a learning health index standpoint, but the demand and the opportunity is perhaps one of the highest across industries in medical and healthcare.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's move to our final question, just being conscious of time here. So, Dr. Advait, specifically as you look at talent development initiatives, as you try and keep pace with this fast changing skill requirements, we spoke of putting your house in order, putting the skill taxonomy in place, marrying it to your JDs, running your assessment centers, continuously, bridging the skill gap. But how do you do it? I mean, what are the various things? I believe, you've been doing some very innovative, pioneering work at Deva and leading the ship there. Can you tell us of some of the various programs and initiatives you've been taking?
Nishchay, we have a list of about 45 different initiatives that we do. So I could actually go on and on about it. We have a master's program with UC Berkeley. We have a brilliant succession planning program that has been in place for 10, 15 years right now, all based on the skill and competency framework. But I wouldn't want to go with the traditional HR responses. I want to actually give you a slight business perspective as to what I learned over the past few years of having moved from consulting into the industry. In addition to everything good that we do in HR, put in the processes, systems, framework in place, have a scholarship program, and all of those things. There are three things, especially in an industry like ours, that are actually very important to keep us relevant in talent development and skilling both. The first one is strong R&D. We actually set up a research and development center 5 years back. That really helped us. Only when you are at the edge of innovation can you as an organization discover the future skills. Second.
So the R&D function is part of the HR team?
No, the R&D is a standalone function within Deva and it interacts with everybody, including us.
So you are basically then leveraging the R&D center also to keep abreast of changing skill requirements.
Second, not all future skills can be identified by the organization. Hence, at Deva, we do not compromise on our partnerships. We only have best-in-class partnerships. UC Berkeley, MIT, GE, Honeywell. You can't catch up with years of research and patents in some of your fields. Hence, collaborate. That will bring you to the edge of future skills. The third point, in what we have started doing with the directions of His Excellency Saeed Al-Tayar, who is our MD and CEO, is that all our business partnerships, all our high-profile purchases and technology contracts, all of them today come with complimentary skilling and training requests, an add-on which is usually for a duration which is 4 times higher, the length in terms of length than what it normally used to be, because people tend to forget that. But in large contracts, it's now mandatory to put in skilling aspects for us. And that has actually helped us stay ahead of the curve quite a lot.
Great. What a phenomenal way to sum it up. On another separate note, I will find out from you how you get millions of dollars. Maybe I can help some of my friends in organizations get to that exponential amount that we need to bridge the skill gap. So this has been a very interesting chat. Thank you, Dr. Amit. Thank you, Dr. Advait. I continue to learn from each one of you through your experiences, and thank you for agreeing to be on the panel. Thank you to SHRM, my friends at SHRM, to organize this virtual webinar on this very important topic. Ultimately, all I'd say is the world now requires a different and better version of ourselves. So while we continue to improve clearly the rules of the game have also changed, and therefore you also need a different version of yourself. With that, keep healthy, keep safe, keep learning. Nitya, back to you.
Thank you so much, Nishchay and Dr. Adwaita and Dr. Amit. That was an interesting, set of questions, very well articulated for our audience. In the interest of time, I'm going to take up just one question from Anshul from the audience. All of you have in parts kind of answered this question, but very quickly, 1 point each of you. So the question goes as this: certain times, especially in today's highly dynamic business environment, long-term and consistent sustainability without any major financial growth or profitability in itself is a great achievement. But the business leaders or owners only look at financial data, and therefore employees are not rewarded appropriately, not realizing that in the long term, the investment in talent would benefit the organization. How can this problem be solved? This is a question that Anshul has posted. So, gentlemen, each of you, very quickly, 1 point each of you.
I think this should be addressed by Dr. Advait, because it's again signaling how money can be made available and people can still be rewarded in times, right? So, Dr. Advait, your perspective.
Nisha, you put me in a spot, but I'll try to be politically correct because as this is getting recorded. So my response goes here. So for employees, there is no dearth of funds if you were to actually ask me today in any of the organizations, because the cost of education is actually coming down, especially in this technology age, because everything is available online. Now, the question is whether they're getting the relevant training or not. Yeah. Now, the dilemma that organizations face, especially in the Middle East, is that if they train the employee, then the employee goes looking for a higher paying organization, wherever he gets a higher pay. So that's the mindset that most of the promoters or the large organizations here have. So how do you address that? So that's the root cause in my mind. So it's not just skilling or education, it's also improving the work environment where the work environment stays aspirational. And it's not just about money. As long as the work environment is aspirational, one will continue to learn and one will find different ways of learning. I'll use my example, Nishchay. I mean, during my days in consulting, I believe there were times when I thought that I was not learning enough, and I walked up to you and you asked me the question, what is it more that you want? Figure out a project or figure out anything that you want to learn. And I came up with a couple of ideas and you let me run with it. We created some new innovative stuff around it. I mean, one can go on and on about it. So I believe it's twofold. One, the mindset of the employee, because the moment you get into a negative mindset that you're not getting it from the organization, you will only tend to see the negative aspects of the organization. If you get into the positive mindset and start looking at a win-win, then you will have the right set of conversation. Secondly, please understand the apprehensions of the organization. If you're able to understand the apprehensions of the organization, your work actually becomes easier. You will see, if you look at statistics, some employees keep on going for trainings, whereas some others don't. Have you ever asked yourself the question, why? People would say because he's the favorite, but the response is not that, because maybe that employee has been able to figure out a way to align himself to the organizational needs. Does that make sense, Nishchay? And is it politically correct?
Yeah. Dr. Amit, your closing comments.
Absolutely. So I think first, and I keep repeating this to my team and to the wider organization, is skilling or looking at upgrading yourself is your individual responsibility and nobody else, right? It's like self-love, right? You've got to give it to yourself. Others may give you love or may not, but that doesn't deprive you of giving yourself love, and skilling is that, right? So expecting somebody else to do it is not a fair ask. I think Adwaita kind of addressed it. And why I say that is, and I constantly give this example, this organization, out of 22,000 people that we have across, I may forget to skill 2,000, but that doesn't mean they forget to skill themselves, right? Because the organization will still run, right? You cannot run, it's your life. So for me, I think it's an individual responsibility. Nishya, where you sit is largely because of you. There are 1,000 people who work with KPMG not doing what you've done, right? It's largely the individual themselves, a little supported by their environment, which is again to do with the individual. So that's my closing thought.
Okay, Nitya.
Lovely, lovely. Thank you so very much, Dr. Advaita and Dr. Amit, for those extremely interesting inputs there. Yes, definitely it is self-love. So while all of us love, learning to be a buffet spread, but end of day, it is our responsibility to ensure that we eat, irrespective whether it's a buffet or a, self-serve. So awesome. On that note, thank you so very much, gentlemen, for joining us and for those interesting inputs. And thank you, audience, for being there and coming up with your questions. We also have the downloadable links shared on the chat. I hope all of you have accessed that. Thank you so very much. You have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Nitya, you may have to close the webinar.